What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Altitude Show. The Altitude Show is presented by Mountain Tough Fitness. If you are coming out west or you're going to hunt out west, or let's just say you want to get in shape for whatever activity you're planning this fall, now's the time to start doing that. Mountain Tough is the place that I would recommend you go. It's how I got rid of my dad bod. And men, dad bods, they're out. You don't want it anymore. Go to mountaintough.com/Dave and use my code Dave at checkout for 10% off. Go to the App Store, download the Mountain Tough app. They have everything that you need there. They have an on-ramp program. If you're not comfortable, you haven't worked out in a while, you just want to kind of get going again. They have the minimum gear daily that they do where you don't need a lot of gear. It takes like 20, 30 minutes of your day if you don't have tons of time. But they have also what I'm doing, which is their Backcountry 2.0 program. It's a 16-week program designed to kick your ass into shape before you go into the mountains this fall. Go check it out. mountaintough.com/Dave. Use code Dave for 10% off. You're not going to regret it. Trust me. All right. So on this episode, it's Robbie Kroger. Robbie is the founder of Blood Origins, a nonprofit that tells the truth about hunting. He does amazing interviews of people, tells their stories about how hunting has changed their life. He's also an incredible advocate for the sport, whatever you want to call it, around the world, internationally. He's originally from South Africa, very interesting person. I learned a lot about Africa in this episode specifically, including controversial topics like hunting elephants and hunting lions and stuff like that, but also just kind of a lot about the culture and some of the challenges. He is a PhD in biology, really, really intelligent dude. I think our conversation was pretty awesome. Thank you for listening to it. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch the full conversation on YouTube. All right, guys, enjoy the conversation.
Oh, thank you, man. Humble, grateful. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, it seems like I only see you a couple times a year at the trade shows. And then one time you came to Oregon and we did a project together. But other than that, I don't get to see you very often. So it's nice to see you. I watch your videos. I think I watch almost every video you post.
Damn, man. Thank you.
And you know,
post a lot. I know we post a lot. A lot of people say that, but
that's okay. But you know, the first thing that always comes to my mind when I watch your videos, I think, I wish I was that smart. And I also wish that I had an accent because I know you're probably married, but before you're married, the chicks love the accent, dude.
I'm married. And I always married for 14 years.
Well, okay, but before that, like I even tell my wife even will tell me that she women love accents. So
that's
not
true.
Only are you intelligent, decent looking dude, you got the freaking accent, man. You got it all going for you.
Yeah, the accent is. I will say this: the Blood Origins wouldn't be where Blood Origins is today if I had an American accent.
That's interesting. I didn't know Americans had accents.
Well, a Southern accent, Texas accent.
Do I have an accent? Do I sound like I have an accent?
No. I think that there's certain parts of this country that are almost like accent neutral, right? The South has its own thing. The upper Northeast has its own thing. Texas has its own thing.
Yeah.
Midwest, Rocky Mountains, just, really. Just a hodgepodge of accents.
I can start to hear an accent now that I left Montana with anybody that lives in Montana. I can kind of tell immediately that that's where they live.
Really?
Yeah, I think there's an accent developing in the Rocky Mountains that in about 200-300 years will be pretty pronounced.
Yeah, the accent helps. Certainly does.
Where's it come from? Tell us.
South Africa. That's a South African accent, but if you ask my South African buddies, I sound like a Mississippian. So the accent, yeah. Every time I go back to South Africa, I work on just strengthening it back, so that when I come back to the States, everyone's like, "We can't understand a single word of what you're saying," so I have to then tone it back down.
Are you kidding me? Really?
Oh yeah.
That's really interesting. I hear zero Southern in you. I know you live in Mississippi and that's where you're presiding. How long were you in South Africa?
I was actually born in Brazil. I was born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Not a lot of people know that. My dad was in the rice trading business. He traded, imported and exported rice around the world. And as a kid, he was gone for like 8 months a year. So he would leave Brazil and then literally just have an around the world ticket. And he would just stop in locations and ports and big cities and sell and trade rice. And then he'd come back, have 3 months, 4 months here, and then start it all over again. And so we were born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. My dad is from Mozambique originally, or South Africa, Mozambique. He was actually born in northern China, in Manchuria, a place called Harbin, to a German mother and a Russian father. And so when I was 3 or 4 years old, we moved to Johannesburg, South Africa, and pretty much spent 21 years of my life in Johannesburg, South Africa, raised there, fell in love with the bush, the African wildlife, just like any African, young sort of South African boy, just like Americans, when you're growing up, Dave, what did you want to become?
I wanted to be an elk hunter.
When you were 8 years old, 9 years old, you wanted to be an elk hunter?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's okay. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. That's all I knew at that point.
But random people, most young boys are like, oh, I want to become a policeman, or I want to be a fireman, or I want to, I want to be whatever. But in South Africa, one of the categories in that lineup is you want to be a game ranger.
Oh.
You want to be the guy who drives the Land Rover around and shows people the wildlife, and you want to be the guy that walks with a big gun. And I wanted to be that guy. And so, in sort of every opportunity, went into the bush, got the highest level of scouting in South Africa, Springbok Scout, did some crazy stuff through the scouting movement in South Africa. But then every opportunity would go and sort of volunteer my services as a game ranger, as a sort of whatever needed to happen. And
now, is a game ranger the same thing as it is here? It's like a warden, like a cop. What's a game ranger then? What?
So a game ranger is a guy. Well, I say game ranger because a game ranger in certain circumstances has all of the above pulled into it. He's an anti-poaching guy. He's a staff guy. He's a client relations guy or girl. He's the guy who drives the cruiser around. He's the guy who takes people on walks. He's the guy who protects you in the cruiser. And he's the guy who's super knowledgeable about trees and birds and plants. And
so he's almost like an outfitter.
He's the guide. I think probably excuse me, the best explanation for a ranger is that he's your tour guide.
Mm-hmm.
That is a jack of all trades beyond just being a tour guide.
Mm-hmm.
So he's proficient enough. If an elephant charges, he's going to kill the elephant and protect the tourists.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an incredibly luxurious job in places. It's not luxurious on the back end, i.e. when you look at the person's, the game ranger is waking up at 4 a.m, working, staying up late with the clients until, midnight, 1 o'clock, and doing the same thing over and over and over again. And there's new clients coming in every 4 or 5 days. The only difference between the game ranger as a guide and an outfitter is think of it as from an ecotourism perspective, not a hunting perspective.
Gotcha.
Showing the animals to photograph and to see and to interact with them, not to hunt.
Yeah, that sounds like an amazing job. I would have wanted to do that if I grew up there for sure. I mean, I thought about being a guide and all that stuff, but honestly, I wanted to be like Larry D. Jones and Will Primos when I grew up. That's who I wanted to be like.
Well, I didn't have that, right? So when I grew up, all I had all these stories that my grandfather had written about hunting. He moved to Mozambique in 1954 and essentially lived the heyday of African hunting, the heyday from the 50s until mid-70s when a revolution occurred in Mozambique. So he lived 25 years of the primo hunting this planet had to offer. Low populations, prolific wildlife, very relaxed regulations in terms of bag limits, And he said to me once, he was like, Robbie, I've actually lived 2 wildlife paradises that this world had to offer. The first, Africa being one of them. The first was when he was a teenage boy. He grew up in northern China and he hunted Siberia, China. You can't hunt China today. And, one of the things he hunted was white-eared pheasants in Tibet. Never heard of anybody hunting white-eared pheasants in Tibet, but he did.
Crazy.
And so he hunted 2 wildlife meccas that this world had to offer.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just incredible in terms of the kind of person he was. So Maputo on the map there is where he
for those that aren't
to.
watching, you can watch on YouTube, but if you're not, I have a map of Africa on because I was not the star of the geography bee in school. So when he says Mozambique, I know that's in Africa, but I didn't know exactly where it was and how. I assumed it must be close to Johannesburg because you talked about them kind of intertwined a little bit.
Yeah, so we would go to Mozambique. We'd go to when he moved there in the 50s, it was called Lorenzo Marques. It was a Portuguese colony. And revolution hit mid-70s and became an independent republic. And it changed its name from Lorenzo Marques to Maputo. But we would go to Maputo every Christmas, holidays, Easter, and just, would live the life of kids, man. They've got amazing fishing, amazing culture. There's a place in Maputo specifically that is very well famous for its prawns. Prawns is like a delicacy, and prawns is shrimp, okay? Same thing. And there's a place in Maputo called Costa do Sol, and it is an incredible prawn eatery. And
if it was a Portuguese settlement before it was Maputo, is the native language there Portuguese, or at least a predominant?
It is. Yeah.
It's the native language.
It's not the native language, but
not the native language, but like a predominant language. That's what I meant.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So my dad could speak Portuguese. He grew up speaking Portuguese, hence why he moved to Brazil to trade rice, because he could speak Portuguese.
Right.
So yeah, my grandfather just, I had all these stories. And what I loved about my grandfather is, and I've got his, like, people can see this here, but I'm grabbing like all his books on the shelf behind me. So this is his famous book that's called My Last Kambaku. It's printed by Safari Press. And just an incredible book. You can hardly find them today. Only 1,000 got printed. If you find one, they're like $400. He was a prolific writer. So he printed that book. He printed a self-published book, I Caught My Fish 82 years ago. And then he printed another book, self-published, called Long Life in Short Stories.
Were they fiction, nonfiction, both?
All nonfiction. All nonfiction. These were his life stories.
Okay, gotcha.
Like of his adventures hunting, his adventures fishing and whatnot.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. No, they're incredible stories. Like, I'll just go through and he had also the classic hunting buddy that went with him everywhere in Mozambique specifically. But he's got stories about the guns in his life. Oh, okay. You want to talk about tangents? Let's frickin' run down a tangent quickly.
Okay.
So there's a chapter here called Guns in My Life, and I've read it over and over and over again. And my grandfather had 4 guns in his life. He had a side-by-side Davidson shotgun that he got in China in 1920. And he brought to South Africa. I shot with it as the only hunt I ever did in South Africa was for pigeons and doves, using the side-by-side Davidson. The unfortunate thing is it was never in my name. And so gun laws have changed significantly in South Africa. I was already in the States at the time, and my father was getting antsy about all of the gun law changes. And so I could not get that double side-by-side Davidson out of South Africa. It was so unique. It had the way that the Chinese licensed guns in the 20s was, it was a wooden stock. So they branded the stock with your license. So my dad being the obstinate, said, screw it. I'm not jumping through all the legal hoops to hold license to this gun anymore. He took an angle grinder and he ground 2 holes into each barrel. And then he took a hacksaw and he hacksawed the shotgun butt off the shotgun. And he went into the authorities and handed his gun in and said, I do not want to own this gun anymore. So that's the shotgun.
What the hell?
All I have
That's
is
sad.
the butt. I have the butt in a glass case here.
Okay.
So I have it. Okay.
Okay.
So then there's 2 more. There were 3 guns. He had a 270 Seiko. I have that gun. I got it into the States. It was a Plains game gun. Beautiful gun. Then he had a 450 Wesley Richards, a double 450 Wesley Richards that he loaned from a friend of his. That's what my dad shot his Cape Buffalo as a 16th birthday present. My grandfather gave my father a Cape Buffalo. And he shot it with the double 450 Wesley Richards. And the picture, everyone comments on that picture whenever I post it because, number one, my dad at 16 looks like a 22-year-old man.
Is that the picture on your website on the About Us page with the rifle on his shoulder?
It's the picture of him lying next to the buffalo.
Yeah.
He's got white sneakers on. He's got like...
Well, no, the one I saw might have been him next to like an antelope of some type. I don't know.
Yeah,
what
he's
kind,
next to an Inyala. He's next to an Inyala.
Yes.
That's my dad at 16.
Okay, cool. Yeah, he looks like a badass.
Yeah, he's a pretty bad dude. Then the other gun that my grandfather had was a 416 Rigby. And the 416 Rigby had a Mahillion barrel, and it was he got the 416 Rigby from a Portuguese woman who sold the gun because her husband had killed somebody with the gun and he went to jail. So he got the gun from her. He used it throughout his professional hunting. And when Revolution hit, and he was like, well, what are we going to do with all these guns? One of the professional hunters that Leo hunted with was a very famous elephant hunter called Harry Manners. Harry had a son called Gary Manners. Gary Manners was in the hunting industry, in the outfitting industry. And Leo gave, we thought he loaned the gun. Maybe Leo gave him the gun and said, here, Gary, here's the 416 Rigby. Nobody in my line is ever going to use this gun. You use it. When I was entering into this game ranging phase, I needed a minimum 375 caliber weapon to be driving and walking with. So I said, why don't I get the 416 Rigby? My dad wrote a letter to Gary. I think I've got the letter somewhere over here. And Gary's response was like, you can use the gun for a little bit of time, but I need it back. And we're like, man, there's just no point. There's no point. So I went and bought a 375. And we forgot about the gun. Fast forward 20 years, 22 years, I've started this thing called Blood Origins. I've talked about the gun, In my brain, it's gone. Like, there's no 25 years, who knows, who knows how old Gary is today. I was just recently in Australia and New Zealand. And I woke up one morning to a series of Instagram DM messages. And because this is an audio medium, I can actually let you listen to the DM that I received one morning. And so my phone typically, when I wake up in the morning, has, 200 WhatsApp messages. I don't know how many DMs. I don't know how many text messages. I don't know how many emails, because the globe is constantly moving, right? 24/7 hunting is happening all over the world, and we're just a spear tip for hunting now. So I get this voicemail. Let's see if it'll play. It should play.
Hi, Robbie. Hope you're well, my friend. I think I might have discovered your grandfather, Leo's 416 Rigby in South Africa. Apparently one of my friends owns it. So after his 416 Rigby, he gave to Harry Manners. When Harry passed, his son inherited it, and then one of my friends bought it from Harry's son. I'll send you some pictures. Maybe I can reunite you with your grandfather's trusted 416. Apparently, he bought it from a lady in Mozambique, and then after that, it went to Harry Manners, and then on to Harry's son. So maybe I'll send you some pictures and stuff. Maybe it is indeed your great-grandfather or your grandfather's 416 Rigby. I'll send you some pictures. Thanks, Rob. Hope all is well with you.
Wow, man.
Unbelievable.
That's
So
crazy.
it gets even crazier.
Okay.
I then was like, is this actually Gary's gun? He knows the story. He has a book. He has this green book he showed me. He's got Harry's book. I've got Harry's book right here. And so I said to one of my family friends in South Africa who actually fortuitously has been interacting with Gary Manners, again, Lord, divine intervention. And I said, Chris, can you ask Gary, number one, if he sold the gun, and number two, if the barrel is a Mahillion barrel? And within an hour, he comes back to me saying, yes, Gary sold the gun, and yes, it has a Mahillion barrel. Here's the kicker. Gary sold the gun 8 years ago to just an agent, like a broker, a gun broker.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, here it is. Because of our blood origins, us talking about it, people knowing about it, it's unfreaking believable.
So you've confirmed it's the right gun.
It's the gun.
And what are you going to do?
Well, I told the guy, I'll buy it, obviously. I told the guy, don't sell it. So the next step is now negotiating a price and then figuring out how to get it out of South Africa. So who knows? Anyway.
What are the gun like? That is an amazing story, dude. I love stuff like that. I tell my kids, like, basically sell everything I have once I die, because I don't want you guys fighting over it. Even if I have land, whatever, I want it gone. It's not worth it. However, my bows, guns, and guitars, nope, you're not allowed to sell them. Keep them, because those have more value than money. Like, so keep them special. You can use them, put them to use, but don't sell them. I think family heirlooms are like, I don't know, they bring something special to the table that you can't find anywhere else, right?
Yeah, no, it's incredible.
What are the gun laws like in South Africa?
So when I left, you had to have a license for your caliber. So I had a license for my gun, my 270. So you have a license per gun. And then when you went into a gun shop, you could only buy ammunition for that caliber of gun. You couldn't buy any ammunition for any other caliber. You had to write down in a registry the ammunition that you're buying, all your details, all your contact information, your hunting license, everything like that. Sorry, not your hunting license, your gun license. And then it started getting more and more onerous once I had left. And so the things that happened was police, they made a law that you had to have a safe in your house. Makes sense. But the police had to check. Then the police had to come check that it was bolted to the floor. Like, you couldn't have a freestanding safe. It had to now be bolted to the floor. Then you had to pay a license fee for every gun license that you owned on an annual basis. Then you had to undertake a proficiency test on every gun that you had to. So you talk about, I know people that believe that the idea of death by 1,000 cuts is fictitious. It's not, because I've seen it with my own eyes. Like, based on where I was from a gun law perspective to where it is today, it's night and day difference. And I remember trying to get my guns out, the 270 Seiko and the 375 Holland Magnum that I had. When I went back to South Africa in 2004, I went to a gun broker and I said, hey, can I sell these guns to you? And he laughed at me. I said, why are you laughing at me? He says, let me show you what the safe looks like. Dave, there probably were, if there were 10,000 guns, there were 20,000 guns in this guy's safe. Because of this whole idea that people just didn't want to own guns anymore, legally. It was just too onerous.
And that's probably the goal, right? The laws you just went through, sound eerily familiar with what some of the things they're trying to push for in the United States of America. Is there anything in the South African Constitution about firearms?
Zero.
Hmm.
Zero.
Yeah. As you were going through that list, I'm like, I have heard all of those things, like exactly, almost. Like what's so bad about having a cop come and check your safe? What's so bad about having to pay registration fees? What's so bad about this and that, the other thing? It's like, well, because it's all a slippery slope. It's like, where do we stop? Where do we end? All that stuff.
Well, in South Africa specifically, you have no idea the kind of cop that is now in your house.
Do they have corruption
looking at
issues?
your stuff. Oh, I'll give you a little story. My brother has moved to Australia, and he went back to South Africa for, to see his mates and check in and whatnot. And they went out on the town, and they got absolutely blistering drunk, both of them. And Michael was the more sober of the two. So he said they determined he needed to drive. So he was driving home in Johannesburg and got pulled over by a cop. And the cop came up to the window and, Mike knows the drill kind of deal. Hey, yeah, we've been drinking. Is there anything we can do? Is the question typically. Is there anything we can do to get us out of this jam? The guy was, how much money do you have? And Mike was like, I got 650 Rand. Like, I've got 650. My buddy here's got nothing. Here, look, here's his wallet open. He's like, nah, that's not enough. I need at least 1,500 Rand. He goes, there's an ATM down the road that you can pull money out of. And so Michael had to drive down to the ATM, drunk, with the cop following, to pull money out the ATM to give to the cop to let them to go.
I've heard, I mean, I know next to nothing about South Africa, obviously, but I've heard there's a lot of corruption issues and also crime too, right?
Yeah, but just live with it. You just live with it.
Yeah.
It's, we had panic buttons in every single room. We had 5 bolts on the front door. We bolted the bedrooms away from the living room, so if they broke into the living room, we had 8-foot-high walls around our house. We had electric fencing on top of those walls.
Whoa.
It was a fortified system. You didn't know your neighbors. You never interacted with your neighbors. But that was the life. Yeah, that was the life, though. And it was a great life. Don't get me wrong. I loved it. I love South Africa. I still love South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't go to Joburg to go to be a tourist at Joburg. You fly into Joburg and you go into Kruger and you go into the magnificent, beaches and coastal towns that we have and the mountains and the bush and the wildlife. It's amazing. It's an amazing country with amazing people that are friendly as all get out. Just so happens there's just really bad crime.
Where does most of the crime come from? Drug trade? Like what's the big issues they're trying to tackle?
Just crime, dude. Just people
just anything
wanting
and everything,
stuff.
Huh?
Yeah, and it's not a racist issue either. It's not black on white. It's everyone on everyone. It's just so.
Yeah, no. My wife's mom was born and raised in Mexico, just outside of Guadalajara, and we went and visited here several years ago to one of her, let's see, it'd be her dad's brother's place, but they all lived in a similar neighborhood in like basically downtown Guadalajara. Crazy city for me. Like I've traveled a lot. That was one of the crazier cities outside of maybe Moscow that I've ever been to. Anyways, all the houses are barred up, walls around them, similar to what you just described. You don't like stand out on the sidewalk and shake hands and water your garden. It's like as soon as you get home, you pull in the gate, you lock the gate, you don't let the kids play outside. But she loved her child. She actually grew up outside of town on a ranch, but to her, that's just home. To me, that was like I was like a nervous wreck for several days. But because I know I take for granted like that I can leave my doors open at my house and probably have nothing to worry about, right?
Yep. Yep.
But so you never became this game ranger. You just wanted to be one, right?
I became it for about 6 months and then quickly realized that there wasn't much money to be made as a game ranger. and the lifestyle was very hard, as I described to you. So I went to university, and when I was 16 years old, my grandfather, Leo, the guy that we've been talking about, he, again, just gives you I'll give you an insight into who he was. And my father's a dilute version of my grandfather. I'm a dilute version of my father. But my grandfather made us as kids, as his grandkids, for 2 years. Every day we'd get the newspaper. And every day there was a bridge solution, the card game bridge, in the newspaper. We would have to cut out the solution and stick it into an envelope. And every month or two, we would post the envelope to him in Mozambique. Because my grandfather loved to play bridge every Thursday night with the Spanish ambassador and the American ambassador and whatnot. They were on Embassy Row, essentially, in Maputo. And so he wanted to be the best bridge player. So this was a way for him to learn how to play bridge. And the deal was that we would get a vacation. As our 16th birthday present, ourselves, the grandson and the grandfather, would go somewhere together. And my trip was to the Okavango Delta in Botswana, a swamp, a river that got turned because of tectonic activity tens of thousands of years ago. And instead of deltaing into a sea like a typical river does, it deltas into a desert. It's an incredible, incredible, incredible environment. And that's where I fell in love with this idea of swamps. And I fell in love with this idea of wetlands. Because we would be going through the swamps in a boat, and you could see 14 foot down into the middle to the detrital layer on the bottom of the river or the swamp. Essentially, you could see hippo footprints. So if you look at Mound, go to Mound and go
right here.
Go above it. So Moremi Game Reserve, that whole green thing, you see that right there? That's the delta. It looks like a delta, right? It looks like a river that's just deltaing. So turn on your satellite layer right there. And so all of that green stuff is swamp. And so Chief's Island is the only island. Like, that's all swamp. Look at that. It should be entering into a river. It should be entering into a sea, I'm sorry. But it enters into the Makadikari Plains right there, which is essentially all desert.
Wow.
And it's just an incredible, incredible system. It's oligotrophic. It is nutrient poor. That's why the water is crystal clear.
It's oligotrophic. What'd you say? You got to, we're on the altitude show here, Robbie. We got to dumb things down a little bit for your nice host that's having you on. Oligotrophic?
Oligotrophic.
Oligotrophic. What does that mean?
It means nutrient poor. So the water is crystal clear. There's not enough nutrients in the water to create an algal bloom. There's no real sediment coming in the system at all. Just an incredible, diverse system that's, the big five, is prolific in the big five being lions, leopards, rhino. There's not many rhino. Actually, I don't think there's a single rhino left today because of poaching. Elephants and buffalo. But that's when I walked into university in South Africa. I walked up to a professor and I said, what do I need to study to become a wetland ecologist? Because I loved it. And so for the next 3 years, I studied everything I could to become a wetland scientist. I got a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Conservation Biology. I got an Honours of Science in Wetland Ecology. I got a Master's of Science in Wetland Ecology. And then at that time, I was just fed up with the guy that I was under. Not that he was bad. You just got sort of locked into the sort of method of how he operated. And I just wanted to see more of the world and experience some other things. And so I started applying all around the world. And this was 2001-ish, end of 2001-ish, early 2002. And Google had not actually come on the scene yet. Yahoo.com was like the search engine. And if you remember Yahoo.com at that time, there were just bullet points under it. And It was like games and entertainment. One of them was K through 12 education, colleges and universities. So I'd click on colleges and universities and would come up with all of the states of America. And I'd click on Arizona. And then it would come up with 150 options in Arizona. And very quickly, I was like, I am never getting through this. And every time I'd go to a university, I'd go to the biology department, environmental science department, environmental engineering department, to just see if there was anybody in the department that I recognized, that I knew based on the work and the field that I had sort of done my studies in. And so I quickly recognized that I'm not getting anywhere. And so what I need to do is I need to go to the University of the state first. Made sense, right? The University of Arizona should be the biggest university in Arizona. Made my way all the way down to Mississippi. Clicked on the University of Mississippi, and there was a faculty member at the University of Mississippi called Marjorie Holland that I knew everything about. She featured heavily in all of my research. She's a wetland ecologist. She worked on this sort of boundaries between wetlands and uplands and how they interacted for wildlife, for fisheries, and all that kind of stuff. And that was my forte. So I just wrote her a very specific email. And I said, hey, this is who I am. This is what I'm interested in. This is who you are. This is what you're interested in. And this is what I want to do together. Luckily, I guess just because of who I am, the email did something. She read it and she responded to it, because as a professor later on in my career, I would get emails from foreign students daily. Dear esteemed professor, you're so great, yada, yada, yada. Can I please work with you? But it was a blanket email. Like there was just blanketing, because, you know, these foreign students just are desperate to come into the United States. And I never opened any of those emails. I just deleted them. So fortuitously, again, divine intervention, she opened it. She felt like it was a good fit. 24 months later, I showed up in Oxford, Mississippi, started a PhD.
Wow. That's crazy, man. Oxford, from South Africa, Botswana, Mozambique to Oxford, Mississippi. How was that
town, Oxford, Mississippi?
How was that culture shock for you?
I'll tell you this. It wasn't much of a lot of people hear me say this and they're like, what? It wasn't much of a culture shock, because Mississippians, if you've never spent time in Mississippi, Mississippians are incredibly friendly people.
Yes.
Incredibly inviting people. And that's what South Africans are. You're hearing it right now. Like the person you're hearing through this podcast is the same dude that would be in front of you face to face. So in that regard, it wasn't any different. What did really sort of was very different was the weather. It gets hot in South Africa for sure, but it does not get humid. And in South Africa in the summer, in Johannesburg specifically, every summer day, it would get really hot to about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Then you get a thunderstorm and it knocks the temperatures down by 20 degrees. You're like, oh, that's beautiful. Brilliant. So I'm living this humid lifestyle in Mississippi for the first week, 2 weeks. And I'm like, this is nuts. This is like a wall of steam every time you leave a building. I said, there's got to be some relief from this. And then all of a sudden I'm inside and this thunderstorm happens outside. I'm like, oh yes, finally some relief. And unbelievably, it just got hotter and it just got steamier. And I was like, this is absolutely nuts. So that was the difference. That was the only thing that really took my breath away, essentially. It was just a change of culture. So,
and it works both ways too. Like I remember the first time I hunted in the South, in Mississippi. I hunted with Will Primos down there.
Nice.
On his old farm that he had, which was a dream come true for me, obviously. Anyways, those mornings, even if it was only like, I don't know, I can't really remember. We were there in December, so let's just call it, maybe it might have been 40 in the mornings, something like that. It felt a hell of a lot colder than 40.
Yeah.
Like that was cold. That was really cold. I hadn't felt a cold like that really before. Must be because of the humidity. I don't know.
No, you're right. It's the humidity. I had a PhD student from Minnesota who said, it's not going to be that cold. Says, I've never been colder.
Yeah. It's different, man. Like I talked big too. And I remember the first morning I went out like kind of lightly dressed and sat in a tree stand. Whew. Won't do that again. So you get your PhD. What do you do with it? And then also, how do you end up starting Blood Origins? Because we haven't talked a lot about that, but that's what I want to spend a majority of the time talking about, because that's your current project, and it's amazing. Like I have, for those that, well, nobody knows because we've never released it, but I actually got to shoot one of these things with you.
It's going to be released in the next 3 months, 4 months.
You came up to Oregon here 4 years ago, 3 years ago.
Yeah, 3 years ago.
And we filmed one of your episodes of Blood Origins. But besides the sort of, I don't know, individual human profiles you do of these hunters and how they're connected to nature, there's a lot of sort of advocacy and education that comes along with Blood Origins. But before we get there, how did you get from the wetlands things to Blood Origins?
So got the PhD, then met the woman of my dreams, blonde hair, blue-eyed girl from the South out of Memphis, Tennessee, who has a PhD as well. So it's Dr. and Dr. Kroger in this house.
Oh, wow.
But she is far more intelligent.
See, dude, the accent and the fact that you got a PhD, you're not even fair to compete against back in the dating days.
Oh, man. Yeah, she has a PhD in 18th century Gothic literature. She's a horror writer.
What? Oh, that's right. You told me this. Yeah, that's right. You sent me her book one time.
That's right.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So she's a horror writer, and just tough little world that is that writing world. But she's slowly building a name for herself. So right after we got married, we actually moved to Starkville, which is the Mississippi State University of it's the Land-Grant Institute of Mississippi. It's the hook and bullet, essentially hook and bullet university that every state has, a hook and bullet university. And I was hired in the wildlife fisheries department as a professor, and had a brilliant 6 years in the department. Loved every moment of it, and during that tenure, I actually built, thinking back on it now, I actually built the mini version of Blood Origins. But it was for what I did as a wetland ecologist. And what we called it was called REACH. And REACH stood for Research and Education to Advance Conservation and Habitat. And what it did was, I was in the water quality game from a wetlands perspective. So I was interested in understanding how I could put wetland features that cleans water. Think of wetlands. People are like, well, what the hell? Why are wetlands so special? Think of wetlands as your kidneys, but they're in the environment. Mm-hmm. You can put crappy water in the top of them, and good clean water comes out the bottom of them. Okay. So my job for 6 years was, how do you put these wetland features that do really good work for the environment, how do you put them into agricultural landscapes? And that's what I got known for. And I got very well known nationwide for the work that we did with wetlands and drainage ditches and whatnot. And so REACH was a way to communicate the good of best management practices, agriculture, working together for the environment. Sounds eerily familiar to what Blood Origins does, but just on a hunting perspective around the world. Mm-hmm. And so I did that, and it's all about who you know in this world. You know that a lot of people, if you're not listening to this and you don't believe it, start believing it. It's all about who you know in this world and who you impress in this world. And I impressed a guy that was the director of the Gulf of Mexico EPA, the Gulf of Mexico program. And unfortunately, the BP oil spill happened. And fortunately for me, the people that got hired in to stand up a federal entity that got born out of the BP oil spill were looking for, once they hired an executive director and a deputy executive director and a chief financial officer, they said, we need to hire a chief scientist. And this guy, the director of the Gulf of Mexico Program Office, who had been loaned into this council to be the deputy director, says, I know exactly the person we need. And he reached out to me and he said, do you want to be the guy who sets up the restoration framework from Texas to Florida and sort of steers the ship for how $1 billion is going to be put in place, and how potentially another 10 billion is going to be put in place. And I was like, holy smokes. Like, that's a change, right? I was fighting for $50,000 grants. Now I'm dealing with 50 million or 1 billion essentially. And so the university loaned me. They loaned me out. And I went from just interacting with farmers, which I loved, to interacting with this, the secretaries of the Department of Interior, of the Department of Army, the Department of Agriculture, and the governors of the 5 Gulf states.
Wow.
And I really thought was like, it was an eye-opening experience to understand how the world actually works. Then I got hired as a consultant for the state of Mississippi, essentially, that was doing the same job that I was doing for the Gulf, but now doing it for the state of Mississippi. And halfway through that job, I sort of lost a little bit of my creative inspiration. I don't know if it was, something happens. It's happened to you, Dave. It's happened to all of us. Something just changes in you, and you're like, man, I need something else in my life. Like, I need to do something that fulfills me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had 2 small boys, Lisa and I. We've got 2 small boys, Leo and Eli. They're 11 and 9 now. They were 5 and 4 at the time, or 5 and 3 at the time. And I started rereading all of my grandfather's books. And I reread another book that I really enjoyed, which is called Robert Ruark's Old Man and the Boy, which is Robert Ruark's a famous Southern author. And that book is about a grandfather teaching his grandson all about Southern hunting, how to train a bird dog, how to the etiquette of shooting quail, bass fishing, saltwater fishing, whatnot. And lo and behold, as I reread the book, it was a book my grandfather gave me, and he had inscribed through the entire book. And in rereading it, I knew the stories because I'd been in the South now for 10 years, 12 years, 13 years already. So I knew deer hunting, I knew quail hunting, I knew bird dogs now. I knew bass fishing, brim fishing. And I just sort of was captivated by the storytelling of it. Now I got captivated again by his storytelling. And I had a little bit more resources, so I was starting to hunt more and more and more. And I think an important element of this story is that I only had that one dove hunt in South Africa. Never hunted in South Africa, didn't go hunting, wasn't interested in hunting. It wasn't in my circle of friends to hunt. Lived in a big city, Johannesburg, 8.5 million people. And got introduced to hunting in Mississippi by a good 6'5", 260-pound redneck who said, "You want to go hunting? Got your hunting license? Yep. Well, here's a launcher. Here's a gun. If something walks by, shoot it." That was my introduction to hunting. And so I had these boys that I was like, man, I want them to hunt. I want them to do the things that I never got to do in South Africa because of where I was raised, the environment I was raised in, all of that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And so I was like, what are we going to do? Now, what can I do? I feel like I'm a pretty good storyteller. And so I started looking at outdoor television, and I was like, man, there's something missing here, man. It didn't feel like people, there were 2 things that I felt like were missing. Number one, I felt like there was nobody really telling stories of others. It was almost like an I, me kind of scenario. And then secondly, there was no real, I felt like there was no authenticity to it. And I don't know if it was because of the way it was filmed or the way that people narrated things. I don't know. I just felt like we could be more authentic as hunters to describe who we are. And then the element that really sets Blood Origins apart today, still today, that kicked us off that made us relevant or made people sit up and notice, is my wife and I were teaching a Sunday school at the time of me thinking through Blood Origins. And I was using a Christian testimonial project called I Am Second a lot. Have you heard of I Am Second?
Mm-mm.
So what I Am Second is, it's a video testimonial project, has very, very, very famous individuals to singers to some no-namers, but majority are very famous. And the one that if you were to watch one, if somebody's listening to me and they're like, what is this? I'd say go listen or watch Josh Hamilton, the pitcher of the Texas Rangers. He's on I Am Second. And he talks about his life. He talks about at 17 being in a car crash, losing his parents, living with his grandmother, living a life of drug abuse and drinking and whatnots. And he talks about this dream that he has. And I haven't watched this I Am Second, Dave, probably in 6 years now, maybe 5 or 4 years. But it was so impactful, the way that it was filmed and the way that he spoke to me. It felt like he was speaking to me, the way that he looked at the camera. That he had this dream that he was fighting the devil. And he was fighting, and could never win, and just kept getting knocked down to a point where he thought he was going to lose. And he woke up. And he was so scared. And he was living with his grandmother at the time that he went into his grandmother's room and got in the bed with his grandmother at 26 years old. He then changed his life. He got off drugs, got off booze, got into tattoos as his vice. He's got tattoos everywhere. And he gave his life over to Christ. And he remembers having the dream again. He was fighting the devil again, same situation. And then all of a sudden, he started winning. He started winning. And then the devil turned and ran. And it was just so impactful, the way that it was told, the story, the way that it was told. I was like, that's what we need to do. We need to have a hunter describe who they are and why they hunt exactly like that. And that's how we started. And I didn't know what Blood Origins was going to be. If you had pressed me, I would have said we wanted to be a hunting show, Dave. We wanted to be famous. We wanted to be in the limelight. We wanted to be, I didn't even know what an influencer was at that stage. And luckily, we didn't.
Well, folks, we're about 15 weeks from hunting season out west. And if you're like me, you've been applying for tags, seeing what tags you drew, looking through your gear, filling holes, fixing things that didn't work. If you're doing that, you need to check out gohunt.com. It's where I do almost all of my research on tag odds or units or trophy potential or maps. But it's also a great place to get your gear. They have all the best brands that you will use when you're on a Western hunt. And so if you're looking for a new sleeping bag, a tent, apparel, whatever, go to gohunt.com. And when you check out, use my code altitude and you'll get 20% off. All right. You there?
I'm here.
All right. Authentic stories. And that's really what you do, right? I mean, that's one of the nice things. There is a lot of bullshit in this industry. Mm-hmm. It used to be a lot worse. I feel like when I first got into this, like technically got into this industry with Sitka or whatever, one of the things I thought we did well was we started telling some cool stories as opposed to just, releasing videos of people killing shit, basically. In fact, the first big film we launched, as controversial as it was called Searching for West. Mm-hmm. And by Mark a guy named Mark Seacat. Yep. And I remember sitting in the office when he called us and he said, "Hey, I didn't kill a bull. In fact, we didn't even see many elk." And at the time, we didn't have these light 4K cameras. I mean, he was carrying around, they had red cameras, which are, really expensive, big cameras. There's no drones, so they had to hire helicopters to get the aerial stuff. And then they had what was called a phantom camera, which was like, I don't know how many frames a second, but it was this incredible slow-mo camera. And we were trying to get a shot. It was this whole story about his family or whatever, but we wanted to get some really, really high quality wildlife footage, and we just didn't get it. And Jonathan Hart and I were sitting at his desk in the office, and we got the phone. We're like, crap, can we release this film if there's no kill? Like, does it have the same power, or will our industry accept it? And my answer was, yeah, I think our industry needs a film with no kill, actually. And we released it, and you either loved it or hated it. And still to this day, I'll tell somebody about that film. They'll be like, I hated that, or I love that, whatever. It doesn't matter. But the point is I think that kind of launched an era of at least people trying to capture a little bit something more than, something taking an arrow behind the shoulder or getting knocked over by a bullet, which there's nothing wrong with that either. I'm not saying there is, but we needed more. We need some more. We need the stories. We need someone that was willing to tell stories. And kind of until you guys came along, there wasn't anybody doing stories on people very well. They would do stories on hunts or a story on a tag or a place, but they weren't really diving deep into like individual stories beyond maybe some hunting celebrities, like just normal people that hunting is a key part of their life. That's more what you do. Yeah, some of them are famous and some of them aren't. Actually, a lot of them aren't, which I think is cool.
Correct. Yeah.
That's even more real, right? You're taking so give our listeners that haven't got to watch any of your stuff, they will after this podcast. You're going to have millions of views after this.
Nice.
Get ready.
Nice.
You're going to be on the red carpet and everything.
I love it. That's why I built Blood Origins, to become famous.
Give people a little bit of what Blood Origins is and what you're currently like. It started out, you wanted to be famous on a TV show. Obviously, that's not how it turned out. Where is it now? What do you do?
Yeah, sure. What I will say that we were blessed in the first 3 years of Blood Origins in that when we just focused on hunter heart stories, okay, for 3 years essentially. And when you get to know me and you understand my personality, I'm one of the most dogged individuals that you will meet. Like I call my superpower being patiently persistent. That is who I am. I'm not going to go away until you tell me no. And then I'll be like, all right, no. Good. Thank you so much. I'll leave you alone now. For those 3 years, again, I didn't know what we were for those 3 years. I just knew that we were just telling good stories and I wanted to keep telling good stories. And we kept approaching companies in the industry to say, hey, this is what we do. Would you help us? i.e., give us money. And everyone told us no. And little did I know that there were 1,000 other people like me asking the same question for their own quote-unquote hunting show to become famous. But we just kept going. And I remember Jim Shockey. I was fortunate enough to have a fortuitous meeting with Will Primos and Jim Shockey early on. And Will Primos had agreed to be a Blood Origins episode. Jim agreed over dinner to be a Blood Origins episode. And I emailed him within 2 weeks after the dinner. And I said, hey, Jim, I'm ready. Let's go. And Jim was like, not so fast, youngster. And he said, you need to show me a distribution strategy for how you're going to do what you say you're going to do before we do this. I closed that email, I opened up Google, and I said to Google, what is a distribution strategy?
Too bad ChatGPT wasn't around. You could have had a whole plan right in front of you in seconds.
I had no idea. I'm a scientist. I'm a scientist with this crazy vision of this is what I want. Anyway, we figured it out. We did some work. We just kept producing episode after episode after episode. Reached back out to Jim Shockey, and I gave him what he was wanting. Actually, it took 2 or 3 emails to get the numbers what he was looking for. And when he finally said, "You've done what I didn't think possible," essentially. But in the email, he said, "I would have lost money on you disappearing. Because I've seen hundreds of you that they've reached out, they've got this idea, they want to do this, but they never follow through.
Mm-hmm.
But you just kept coming. You just kept sending me email after email after email of this story. Hey, check this story out. Hey, Jim, we just released this one. Hey, we just released this one. That he was just like, okay, let's go do this. And we got to a point where, and because I had received no money, I had drained my savings account, essentially, my own savings account. And my wife came to me and she was like, look, love your passion, love what you're doing, but I want my savings account back. And I was like, okay, what do we need to do? So we sold a film or two, one to Pope and Young, one to Weatherby, sort of to make ends meet. And a very good friend of mine, a friend of Blood Origin, said to me, he was like, look, you really need to change your business model. You need to change your business model into a 501c3. He goes, because what you're doing is you're advocating to the non-hunting majority that hunters are not who you think they are. That you're changing this perception, you're changing this narrative of hunters. And that's educational, which fits with a 501c3 designation. And so I said, that I think you're right. And so early 2020, the beginning of COVID, starting to creep in kind of thing, we applied to be a 501c3. We got it formalized in June and July of 2020. And what happened was two things. Number one, all of a sudden when we announced that we had this avenue for people to support us, we received support. I was like, holy shit, people are giving us $10 a month. Oh my God. To do what we do. Unbelievable. Secondly, it opened up the pipeline to what we could do. Because in the 501c3 process, you have to establish a mission. And we established our mission as a very simple statement, which is to convey the truth about hunting. And what that allowed us to do then is convey means all sorts of things. Convey means tell, show, argue, debate, push back, articulate, whatever you want to call it. Hunting is hunters, is wildlife, is habitat. It's all the things wrapped up in. And the truth is content. And so we then entered into this new world where we started and have continued and believe to be today the spear tip of anything that's happening in a hunting specific context anywhere in the world. We're the ones that will say something about it in a very specific way. We say things very respectfully. We say things very truthfully. We say things laced in science, a little bit of emotion, with an accent. And it works. And it's working. And we have no problem. I have no problem. And I think here's the other element that I think sets us apart. From number one, we have no ego, right? As soon as we turned, this thing isn't Robbie Kroger. I just happen to be the face and I happen to be the voice. Okay. But this isn't Robbie Kroger. This is us. It's our community. It's you, Dave Brinker. It's everyone that belongs in the hunting community. We do what we do every single day for you, for us. I just happen to be the voice and the face for it. But that's unique because you know the person who's fighting for you. The other NGOs that do what we do, that you don't really know them. There's no personality to them, right? There's no like personal connection to them. There's a very personal connection to us and me. But we want to champion every other NGO that's out there because they're doing great work, right? They're doing great work for hunting. They're doing great work for hunters. And we've done that several times across the world. So that's where we're at right now. Blood Origins is this non-for-profit organization that operates on a global scale. We're a very, very small team. I'm the only salaried employee. I became full-time Blood Origins, going back to the whole, started this thing sort of as an idea. January of this year, the board of Blood Origins did a reasonableness determination with the IRS to say, what would be a reasonable salary for someone that's running an organization of this size in this place. And then thankfully, once they voted on the salary, asked me to be the executive director. And that was January 3rd. And I've been full-time Blood Origins now 5 months. And it's a dream job.
What is it like having a full-time job and a great career, something that's not interesting, like really interesting full-time career that you had? There's a lot of people that reach out to me because they have a side hustle they want to make their life.
Yeah.
And it's not just hunting stuff, obviously.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Like, how did you do that? Like, just tactically, like, was it evenings and weekends, just here and there? Like, how did that work? And then along with that, what would you tell people that have similar ideas living in their heads? Like, man, that must be nice, man. He got so lucky, that's his job now. I'm still digging holes or whatever. Mm-hmm. What would you say to them, and how did you do it?
I think the most important thing I can say is that I'm married. I don't know if this person that, fictitiously we're talking about is married or not, or has a partner or whatnot. I couldn't get to the point that I am today without my wife. However, I never recognized that during the process. And because of the lack of recognition of that, I nearly lost it all. And so, recognizing that there are sacrifices to be made, and my sacrifices were, there was no free time anymore. There was nights and weekends, as you said, but it was also like, okay, I'm taking my PTO from the office and I'm going on an 8-day trip to record 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 Blood Origins episodes. I would leave work on a Friday afternoon and drive, or we'd wake up on a Friday morning, 3:00 in the morning, and drive 8 hours to get to the first Blood Origins episode and work all weekend, and then get home at 10:00 at night on a Sunday and start my day job. Or if I was doing the day job, I would take the day job with me on the road. And so I'd be on conference calls all the time. I'd have to do work in wherever we were at night for the day job whenever I was on site with Blood Origins. That was all my sacrifice, right? That was not time spent with my kids, not time doing the things that I should have been doing. And Dave, honestly, I never hunted, at the peak of it, in 2021, I think was the peak of everything associated with Blood Origins. Everything came to a head. I hunted 3 days in 21. Hunted for myself. This thing that I'm fighting for every single day, I only got to do it 3 days. Not a single minute of those 3 days did I hunt with my kids. This thing that I'm fighting this thing for in the future. The sacrifice from my wife's side was there was nobody to help her. There was nobody supporting her. I was supporting financially. And I felt that was what I needed to be doing. But she needed much more than that. There was time gone. She couldn't go anywhere. If the kids had something, her career was put on pause. She couldn't, if she had a conference, or she wanted to go see a writer, or she couldn't go because I was gone. We didn't have support for the kids. We had no family around us. We had nothing. So it might have looked like all roses for the last 5 years, and I don't think nobody's heard me say any of this before. period. Because it's sort of like I needed to recognize where I was at. And my wife had to pretty much get to the point to say, okay, we have a problem. And you can either deal with the problem or we've got much, much bigger problems. So it was a bit of I didn't mean for it to get all like,
well, then no, but that's real though. Like, is there a way to avoid that in doing what you did, or like what? And I'm not saying it's right or wrong or anything. I'm just saying, like, if you're going to have a side hustle that you're trying to make into your living, there's going to be like this period of time where it's sucking up all your extra time, and that's taken away from somewhere. It's got to come from somewhere. There's no free time. So, like, what would you do different if you could go back and do it now? Because obviously you wouldn't want the outcome to be different in terms of now you get to do this full time. Have you ever reflected on that? Like, how could you do it differently?
I think what I would have done differently, knowing the conversations I've had with my wife, is this. And I don't think it would shape any different the outcome. Okay, I think we'd still be in the same place. But I would be more cognizant of, okay, instead of me doing back trips, hey Lisa, what are your needs? Like, what travel needs do you need to do? And she was like, oh, I'm going to need to do this and this, and sort of putting that in as a marker. All right, that would have helped this. That would have helped that. That would have helped that. And maybe doubling down a little bit on, okay, if you're going to do this, then I'm going to do this and make up time or whatnot. I don't know. That's the only thing I would do different, is just recognize the toll I was having on the family. Yeah. And put in mitigation measures at the time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I had a lot of the similar conversations. And it's tough. It's really tough, especially if you don't have family around and you have young kids. When Sitka was really getting going, I had to travel a lot. And then when I wasn't traveling, I was at the office nonstop. And then it was always stressful, hundreds of emails, calls, pressures, whatever. We were exploding, right? And there was only like 5 or 6 of us. It's not like everybody thought there was like hundreds of employees. It wasn't. And then I would come home and my wife would be depleted, and the kids, they're young, so they didn't maybe know any different. But now that I look back, I share the same feelings. I probably would have set more boundaries. I probably would have communicated better and asked if there was more ways I could give her a break. Right. I regret it. I try to be better at it now. I'm not perfect. I still fuck up pretty frequently, but
sure, me too.
But maybe that's it. Maybe it's just having it front of mind and not letting your passion get you over your skis. Because like you said, if you have something that you're really working for and then you finally get to do it, it won't be that fun to do it if you have no family. You got to have both. You have to have both. Well, I think you should have both. Doesn't mean you have to. I have friends that don't have a wife and kid, they're fine. But in my opinion, I would be a total piece of crap if I didn't have a very smart and devoted wife and partner to help me through life. And I wouldn't want to lose that over a project. I mean, it would just suck. But I also fight for my projects and the time to do those. And I have a lot of them. And so that balancing act is really hard for men, because generally speaking, you're pretty emotionally intelligent, Roby. You can tap in there. I cried on your episode. I know. But most men, not so emotionally intelligent. They don't catch those cues. They may not see the red flags.
I didn't catch them until, it was straight in my face. Luckily, she was understanding enough to like give me enough grace to just be like, all right, start making amends kind of scenario.
Yeah. Well, good on you, man. So you're full time now, which congratulations, by the way, because I know how long this has taken.
It's amazing.
What's that look like? Like how much? What do you guys? How much content are you guys putting out? And like, what's the frequency? And what's the? Well, go there first, and then I have a question.
Yeah, it's funny. I absolutely have the best job in the world now, hands down. For what I do. But a board member told me, and he was very, very astute. One of my board members is like, you need to watch out that you don't burn out and hate hunting, because this job is 24/7 now. I caught myself like the middle of March, and I hadn't had a weekend off because there was travel, it was show season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're going to burn out, it's going to be about right there.
Yeah, it was, you were constantly going. And as I said to you in the beginning, my phone is the conduit to the world of hunting. So, every day, it doesn't matter what time of the day, somebody is interacting with us somewhere in the world. Just think about it like that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter time of the day, someone is interacting with us somewhere in the world on whatever platform they choose to interact with us on. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, WhatsApp, text message, email. All of those things are sort of the conduits of information that are coming into Blood Origins.
Mm-hmm.
And every morning you wake up and you've pushed the stone up the hill. And when you wake up, that stone is back to where it was, just maybe a little inch forward or 2 inches forward.
Yeah.
And, but I wouldn't change it for the world. And I've just got to start recognizing balance. I've got to start recognizing that it's okay to hunt. It's okay to have the weekend. It's okay to plant your vegetable garden. It's okay. Leave the phone alone for, 48 hours. And so in terms of the content, nothing's really changing in terms of what you see come out of us. We're pretty much in a good rhythm right now. What you're about to start seeing from Blood Origins is the release of much, much bigger pieces of content. Our Blood Origins episodes, like yours, are going to come out, but we're starting to morph our Blood Origins episodes, for example. We want to be, like, for instance, with you, Dave, we spent 3 hours with you.
Yep.
Our Blood Origins episodes, now that I'm full-time, now that we have a little bit of resources behind us, we're going to spend 3 days with someone. And so we want to embed more with them. We want to get more real with them. We want to become more authentic. We want to show their lives, their families in the Blood Origins type context. And we filmed one of those already in New Zealand. We've got another one in Idaho at the end of July, and we possibly have one in Tennessee at the beginning of August. Go ahead.
The other interesting thing I think that has come of this, that maybe you foresaw or maybe not, is your consistent advocacy and education. Like, I learned about a lot of the international international hunting challenges from your Instagram, because my antennas don't reach internationally, generally speaking. I'm pretty in tune with what's going on our soil here, but you, besides these interviews and telling people stories, you also have kind of created a name for yourself as someone who says, hey guys, over here, this is happening right now. If you ever want to hunt in Africa again, you might want to say something, or if you ever want to bring a trophy home or whatever the problem is, right? That's pretty cool. I like that, because like I said, most people in my tribe and like the Western hunter, they're worried about like elk, mule deer, sheep. They don't, and it kind of ties back to the gun laws we were talking about earlier in South Africa, and how sometimes our government, they're not really original. So they tend to steal ideas from other places. And so, the same happens in hunting. Maybe some law that's passing in Africa yeah, you may think that's out of touch for you because you're like, screw it. I'm never going to Africa. I don't care if you can bring a lion home or whatever, a buffalo. But someday that may reach your shore and affect you. And then you're going to go, well, shit, I heard about that a long time ago. I didn't do anything about it. Right. Yeah. So I think it's really cool what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that. That's certainly something, again, that we're growing and changing, but us sticking our head above the parapet and explaining a situation and explaining the truth so that people have the kernels, the nuggets of information, like you said, that you then can confidently speak about an issue to a dinner party or to someone on Instagram or someone on Facebook and say, no, what you're saying is not right. It's not right. It's wrong. Here's the truth. Here's the facts. If you want to learn more, go to this video and learn about it. And Africa is a low-hanging fruit, and a lot of people are like you, unfortunately, in America. They're like, never going to hunt Africa. I can't believe someone would hunt an elephant, which is the most ridiculous statement in the world, but I get it. That's why, again, we educate about, like, this is what elephant hunting is. This is what lion hunting is. But those laws aren't being passed in Africa. They're being passed in the United Kingdom. They're being passed in Connecticut. They're being passed in New York. And what do you think's next? Those are just the low-hanging fruits, man. Those are the ones that are easy to wrap emotion around. That's what they're going to grab first. What's the next low-hanging fruit? Predators. Predators in America. You've seen it all across the West. Predators and hounds. Predators and dogs. That's another low-hanging fruit.
Yep. Once
those low-hanging fruits are gone, I don't think they'll come after, because I've heard them actually say this, HSUS will probably never come after cervids, deer and whatnots. It's not charismatic enough for them to make any money, and it makes no sense to push back on it. So predators is going to be the hill that they die on. Wolves, bears, coyotes, bobcats, and then the reintroduction and endangerment of certain species. So, yeah, we're getting, again, talking heads is what we do. Talking heads is when I get up in front of the camera that you've seen. It almost looks like a meme style kind of scenario. We're migrating that from a 3 to 5 minute piece to being more 10 to 16 minutes. That is now more in depth. Here's more of the articles. Here's the science. Here's what this guy said. Here's what this guy said. If you want the information so that you're confident in pushing back, and that's what we've seen. We've seen over the years, people now feel confident enough when someone mixes the terms hunting and poaching. They feel confident enough because they've heard me speak, they've seen me comment, to push back and say, you're comparing hunting and poaching like shopping and shoplifting are the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I heard you say that the other day. That made sense to me. Tell me, let's talk about elephants, because
let's go.
Let's go. Let's go. Let's talk about the elephant in the room.
Would you ever hunt an elephant, Dave?
I don't have any desire to hunt an elephant, but I don't really have a huge desire to hunt a lot of things in Africa, and I have nothing against it necessarily. I just, kind of a traditional Western guy. I will go there, and I will thoroughly enjoy it. Most of the things that I would like to hunt, that I have a desire to hunt, are like the antelope species, the more traditional stuff, kudu, gazelles, stuff like that, impalas.
Yeah, I wouldn't hunt an elephant either. I'm not interested in that.
Yeah, it doesn't do much for me. I watched the film not very long ago, actually. Fred Bear shot the elephant, and I don't know. It's just not for me. But I want to be educated as to. I mean, I have my anecdotal stuff I'm educated on, but somewhere I said something. I can't even remember where it was the other day. Maybe it was when I was watching that film. Somebody said something. I don't understand how anybody could ever shoot an elephant. Did you know that they live this many years and they're smart and they actually bury their dead and all these things? And but what is the answer you give to people about elephants specifically? I know that we could talk about lions and leopards and all these other things, but elephants specifically, why is it okay to hunt an elephant?
Okay. So the rhetoric that you're typically going to come across when it comes to elephant hunting is, how can you hunt an endangered species?
Okay.
Elephants are on CITES 1, Appendix 1 of the endangered species list. The answer is yes, elephants are endangered based on population declines over time throughout their quote-unquote native range in Africa. However, that is on a complete continent-wide scale.
Right.
You cannot
Which is
assess-
generally speaking how endangered species acts work, right? They look at the population as a whole. That's one of the problems we have with wolf litigation in the States is we could say, yeah, but we have the numbers under control in Montana, but then they can come back and say, yeah, you do. But as a whole, they're still endangered.
Correct. So I'll give you two examples. Botswana.
Mhm.
Botswana currently has 130,000 elephants. According
Wow.
to the best science on biodiversity maintenance, on sustainability of ecosystems, every ecosystem in the scientific terminology, there's a word called carrying capacity. Carrying capacity simply is the amount of biomass an ecosystem can hold and sustain without having any detriment to the health of that ecosystem. Science, the best science that I know of, estimates the carrying capacity of elephants in Botswana to be around 50 to 55,000 elephants.
So it's over three times.
Almost. There's 130,000, so almost
130.
double
I
at
thought you said
least.
180. Okay. Yeah.
And so they're definitely not endangered in Botswana. So that's answer number one. Number two, would hunting endanger that population? Would it drive that population to become endangered? Well, Botswana only issued in 2022 440, I believe. It could be 400. 400, let's just call it 450. 450 permits to hunt elephants in Botswana. 450 divided by 130,000 is 0.001% of the population. Elephants grow their growth rate, their lambda, is around about 6 or 7% on an annual basis. So elephant hunting, whatever you want to call it, trophy hunting, is not going to do anything. Is a blip, is a mosquito on the back of an elephant with regards to change in population over time. The third thing that is important is that in these range states like Botswana, Zimbabwe, Namibia, South Africa, Mozambique, elephants typically occupy areas that are very, very rural, i.e., very, very poor people live in these areas. These very, very poor people scratch by a subsistence lifestyle. They're planting their fields with, whatever they have, millet, corn, maize, and that food is grown to feed their family for the year. And in one night, an entire herd of elephants can wipe out everything that they grew for their families. So human-wildlife conflict is a big, big thing in Africa. I am not saying hunting is the panacea of human-wildlife conflict, but it is a tool that can be used for human-wildlife conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And so elephants can be mitigated. Certain elephants can be identified. Certain elephants can be removed due to human-wildlife conflict. Mm-hmm. The last thing I will say is, again, tied to the ruralness of the communities that interact with elephants and where elephants are typically hunted. Elephants serve as a immense protein source for people. Think about how much meat comes off an elephant. You, Dave Brinker, cherish the amount of meat that comes off an elk. These people that have nothing, no protein to speak of, they've got cattle. They don't use cattle as a food source. They use cattle as a currency to barter, to trade, that kind of stuff. Elephants, the meat that comes from elephants allows these villages to have a protein source for weeks, if not months.
How much meat are they getting off those elephants?
Gosh, man, it depends on the elephant, obviously, right? Big bulls are a lot heavier than females.
Right.
But you're talking at least a ton of meat, 2 tons of meat, probably.
Wow. That's insane.
And look, I get videos, again, twice a week of elephants
How is that?
being taken. How is the meat?
Yeah.
I don't like it. It's really tough.
Okay.
But again, we've got a documentary that's coming. Yeah, it's different. It's definitely different.
But I mean, the people that need it they don't have the choice necessarily to choose between a ribeye steak and from a artificially, steroided up whatever cow from California. They're going to take the protein they can get, and
But I will say this, Dave, that we've got a documentary coming called Wire and Water out of Zimbabwe. And if you go back in our Instagram, you can actually see this guy. His name's Hachiwe. Hachiwe is the lead game scout on this place called Wilberforce. And we filmed Hachiwe and the game scouts cooking up 6-week-old elephant ribs. They had elephant ribs drying on racks for 6 weeks. And Hachiwe will tell you that it is the best meat that he's ever had. And I said to him, really, Hachiwe? It's the best. And you can listen to him in the video. He says, it's number one. It's number one.
Okay. Hey. More power to Hachiwe. Okay, so we got hunting isn't detrimental in the places where they're thriving, like Botswana. Correct. Number 2, we have human-animal conflict. Correct. And number 3, they're a great protein source. But what do you say to those people? Does that answer the emotional question of the ethics behind killing something that's so smart? What do you say? Like,
I would say to someone that is saying that an elephant is, I think that you're giving an anthropomorphic evaluation on the intelligence of an animal over another animal. So if you're using that argument that don't kill an elephant because they're smart, so a white-tailed deer is not, like, we're okay killing a white-tailed deer because it's not smart, quote unquote. So to me, you've put an anthropomorphic gradient of intelligence on animals, which I don't think is appropriate. Sure, elephants communicate differently than other animals. They seem to, again, we've never been able to speak to an elephant, so we're making assumptions on what they do and why they do it. But they do seem to bereave their death. They're elephants that have died. They tend to like move the bones around and pick the bones and whatnot. They have a charisma about them, which may sort of influence the anthropomorphism around them. Like, if I've been around elephants, you haven't. They're amazing creatures. They're magnificent.
I beg to differ. I was around elephants like a month ago at the Portland Zoo. How dare you? I was like this close.
All right, I'm going to tell you a joke. Okay. Actually, it's not a joke. It's actually not a joke. It's an anecdote that there was this American tourist in Kenya, and he was on safari and whatnot, and there was this elephant that he came across that was like moving his front foot up and down, up and down, up and down. He was like, man, there's something wrong with that elephant. Maybe I should go and do something and help that elephant. So he got out and he cautiously approached the elephant. The elephant's looking at him, just moving her foot up and down, up and down, up and down. And he walked up and he looked at underneath the foot that the elephant was holding up. And he noticed there was this huge piece of wood in the elephant's foot. So he crept closer, and he looked at the elephant, make sure it's not going to harm him and whatnot. And, he reached in and he grabbed that piece of wood and tried to yank it out, stuck a little bit, and the elephant pulled back a little bit. He held on, and all of a sudden the piece of wood came out. And the elephant started trumpeting, and he stood back. It's like, oh, what's going on? And he almost felt like the elephant put his foot down and recognized that, oh man, this thing's gone. And he felt this huge connection to this elephant. And this elephant like nodded at him, shook its head, and he was like, man, I helped this elephant. And so years go by, 20 years, 30 years, he's with his kids in the local zoo in the States. And lo and behold, they came past the elephant enclosure. And the elephants are way, way, way on the other side of the fence. And this one elephant comes like screaming across to where he is. And it's making all sorts of commotion and whatnot. And it gets to the front and starts moving its leg. Up and down, up and down. And he's like, oh my God, he remembered this elephant that was in the wild that he helped. And he's like, can't believe it. That, this elephant, it's the same elephant. Elephant's looking at him, puts its foot down, lifts its foot, moves its foot up and down. And the guy goes, I can't believe it. It's the same elephant. So he climbs over the fence, climbs into the elephant enclosure because he just wants to get close to the elephant that he helped. As he gets closer to the elephant sees him, wraps its trunk around his legs, and smashes him into the ground and kills him.
Whoa.
Just so happens to be it wasn't the same elephant, Dave. So,
okay, so let's talk about lions then. Let's talk about
lions.
Let's dig up all the controversial issues here today on the Altitude Show.
Are we going to go next? Is going to be, can we do feral horses after lions, then wolves, and feral cats? This will go viral. It'll go viral.
Sure. Well, let's talk about feral horses because there is right now something that people can do about the feral horses. So yes, you're correct. Let's not talk about Cecil right now. We'll talk about Cecil on a later podcast. Let's talk about feral horses specifically in Nevada.
Yep.
And I have personal experience with this as well. I live in a state that borders Nevada. I spend a lot of time not a lot of time, but in the fall, I love going down to Southeast Oregon in the desert that borders Nevada and hunting. And the horses are up there too. In fact, they've had tremendous issues with feral horses in a place that I love a lot, which is called Heart Mountain National Antelope Refuge. And I've seen personally the effects of feral horses. But tell us a little bit about what's going on in Nevada right now, or maybe just generally in the Western United States.
Yeah.
Give us a little bit of an education.
So any wildlife, regardless of whether it's native or introduced, I think from a baseline perspective, you got to understand this. Any wildlife, whether it's native or introduced, needs to have some sort of population control on it, depending on the sort of anthropomorphic fingerprint that landscape has. And what I mean by that is there's places in the jungle that probably needs very, very, very minimal human interaction on it. There's other places like Australia, like horses in Nevada or the West, in which humans were a part of the introduction. They're in a system that they're not typically native in and don't have the constraints that typical wildlife would have in terms of maintenance of populations. And so humans, as the stewards of the land, as we are supposed to be, need to have a much larger fingerprint of management on it. And just because a horse is a horse, we talked about elephants already. You can say the same thing about lions. You can say the same thing about wolves. Management is needed to ensure that the ecosystem is healthy. And I don't care if you're a bleeding heart vegan or an anti-hunter, if you truly took a step back and asked yourself, why do you do what you do? Why are you passionate about what you are passionate about? If you're a hunter, if you're a vegan, if you're an anti-hunter, the answer should be very, very, very similar, which is we're interested in having the healthiest, most sustainable ecosystem on the as we can get for our kids and our grandkids one day. Would you agree to that, Dave?
Yes.
So that means if there's something out of balance that we can see is out of balance, we need to do something about it. Wild horses, based on, again, the best available science that we have of rangeland ecologists, their designated capacity to maintain health of ecosystems is supposed to be around 27,500 number. That's horses and burros together. The current estimate of horses and burro on the rangelands is, I think, 84,000 or 85,000 or 82,000, something around there. Now you're talking something that's 3 to 4 times higher than it should be. The other element that you have to consider when it comes to horses, unlike a wolf, unlike a cat, is that they're actually a heavy hoofed animal too. And heavy hoofed animals have a significant impact physically on the landscape too, especially when they congregate around waterholes and riparian areas and whatnot, which leads to erosion and sedimentation and all sorts of things. And so the federal government has tried and has a lot of money. They spend upwards of, I think it's 100 million, 120 million a year on feral horses and burros. I don't know where the money goes, but they do. They're doing a bunch of research.
Maybe they do. Maybe they do.
Yeah. They've got some fertilization, sterilization control measures. They release an annual report every year. They've done some roundups to sort of adopt a Mustang. But because they are an animal that is tied in with a domesticated pet, there is a very strong reluctance and a very strong push for any sort of lethal management when it comes to this animal. And now to a point that in Nevada, there is a bill going through the legislature that is asking to proclaim the animal, the horse, the wild Mustang as the state's wild horse, essentially. Not the state animal, because the desert bighorn sheep is the animal of the state of Nevada.
Not a feral horse, a wild horse, and because that's one of the interesting distinctions that people that when they talk about language matters, and these horses are feral. We introduced we introduced them there. They're not. Yeah, I guess they're wild, but they're not wild. Like we do this game all the time with fish in the Northwest too. Where does this go from here? Because that's clearly an issue if it's 4 times the carrying capacity. I mean, it's you know what I've noticed down there, and I'm not a scientist, but the thing that's most devastated is water sources. Mm-hmm. Those horses can drink. They suck down those little water holes out in those deserts. Like, it's crazy how fast they can take a water hole down to nothing. And people don't realize, if you haven't spent any time in the northern Nevada desert or the southeast Oregon, southwest Idaho, and you go out there in July on a normal water year, not a crazy water year, and you find yourself some water. Like, you go find yourself some water. Like, those animals have to go miles to get water in a lot of those areas. And when I'm saying water, it's not like a flowing river or a big lake. It's like a pothole with like 10 feet of muddy water in it and bugs, and it's all they got though. I mean, those antelope and those mule deer, they're walking miles, desert sheep. and those herds of horses come in there and just water gone. But that's an anecdotal example. And obviously, if it was the state animal, that would create even more problems for managing them, right? That's the idea. Is if you do that, like what's the downsides to that besides the obvious?
No,
more protections.
It's not really it's not a protection. It's just more of a, any sort of chance of lethal management in the future is going to be met with this. But it's the state animal. Like, how is that even possible? One of the state animals. Why?
Right.
How is that possible?
Right. But you do have the same conversations about horses that you do elephants, because horses, that's like my horse in my field that I've known her for 20 years. We ride and we talk, and they're intelligent. That's why people struggle with the lethal management of them, right?
Well,
one of the reasons.
Yeah. Well, you would, take your horse in her backyard scenario. If you had 200 horses in there, what would you do?
Well, I think people, just arguing from that perspective, I think what they would say is, well, really, it's almost like sometimes when you're debating these issues, it's like out of sight, out of mind. Mm-hmm. The same people that will eat a beef burger from McDonald's, but they can't think of eating an elk burger because they know that you killed the elk. They can silo out the fact that cow that they're eating in their McDonald's burger was slaughtered probably in a building and had a very unhappy life. But they don't have to think about that. So if they have 200 horses in their backyard, they can just come get them and round them up. Take them out to the desert. They won't hurt anything out there. You can't kill them though. You can't do that.
Yep. You can't. And it's so you asked the question like, so what's next? There's only a couple of things that are going to happen. One, the population's going to continue to get bigger. Like I think I looked at the data, I pulled the data out of Nevada. Like in 2017, they had, I think, 27,000 horses in 2017. Today, they've got 44,000 horses.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Dude, that's insane. In 6 years?
Yeah. Yep. So
wow.
It's going to be, the population is going to continue to increase.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to see a couple of things are either going to happen. You're going to see an ecosystem break, i.e. there's going to be massive erosion, and at that point, it's almost like irreversible. 2, you're going to see wildlife populations decline. Not that you're not seeing them today, but probably worse. But probably the most likely thing is going to happen is that the habitat's going to degrade to a point that the horses themselves cannot sustain themselves on the landscape. And I think we're seeing that already. I think I've never seen a wild horse, but I've seen and heard a lot of evidence that these horses don't look good. They look very skinny. They look unhealthy. And so you're going to have a mass mortality event. And your mass mortality event's going to come as a result of either starvation, which is not a pleasant way to die, or 2, because the population density is going to get high enough. Once a population gets high enough in any wildlife scenario, Mother Nature's way to curb a population is typically disease. And so a disease is going to come into that population of horses and knock down, however many percentage, points, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%. And it's going to reset the system. And so, unfortunately, the people that are pro-horse, and this is what we say about a lot of things, they don't want lethal control. So which, when done correctly, is the most humane way to go. So what you're advocating for is no control, no management, population exponential growth to a point where disease and starvation are going to be the main mortality drivers in that population, which is probably the most inhumane way to go from an animal ethics or animal rights perspective.
Right. What's the biggest issue on your mind right now before we wrap up that we can, what keeps you up at night?
I think what keeps me up at night is people not realizing and this is not fear tactics from my perspective, because I hate the idea of sort of fear mongering amongst, topics. And I think that it's changing. I feel like Blood Origins has a role in this, but I think I'm worried that if you're not paying attention, you're going to lose it. And the reason Blood Origins is what it is today is because I know what it's like not to have areas to public land to hunt. I know what it's like to have very restricted gun control measures on me. And so I have this perspective to this thing that we have like at our doorstep here in America, which you don't ever get anywhere else in the world. It is a very, very unique, privileged scenario to be in. It's not your right, it's a privilege. And it's a privilege for me, now a South African, now proudly an American citizen, to say it. And because I have it now, and my boys have it, like you've got to recognize that you don't want to lose it. And for you not to lose it, you have to do something about it. You have to recognize when you're hurting it, and then recognize how to help it. And so at the end of the day, if you want to take one thing home from what I've said, if there's something you can do at home and you're listening to this, is simply ask the question every time you do something associated with hunting is this going to help or is this going to hurt hunting? So really all you're doing is thinking. And if you just gave a little bit more thought to how you act when you're afield, give a little bit more thought to what you post, give a little bit more thought to the comment that you put with that post, give a little bit more thought before you respond to a hunter or an anti-hunter calling you all sorts of names under the sun, we're going to be in a jam-up place. And it'll be great.
Where can people, I appreciate that. That's a really good advice. Where can people find all the things, man? We want to support you.
All things Blood Origins. Just Google Blood Origins, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Blood Origins. We're a non-profit. I'm a non-profit executive director, so I'm constantly chasing money. If you feel like you can give the cost of a cup of coffee a month, you go to Starbucks, you buy yourself a $5 caramel macchiato. I think a caramel macchiato is actually like $7.18 if you get a grande right now.
Those things have like 700 calories in them.
It's okay. I have one every time I go to the Memphis airport. It's okay. It's okay, people. It's okay, people. But if you can have a cup of coffee and you have maybe 3 a week, could you steer one of those cups of coffee in terms of money towards what we do at Blood Origins? $5 a month, $6 a month. It all helps us do what we do and supports us every single day. That's how you can support us. If you have a company, if you have a blue-collared company that's not even associated with the hunting industry, we've got construction companies, we've got engineering companies, we've got insurance companies. If you feel like you want to support us, we're a tax-deductible non-profit. It's all a write-off against your business. We have a conservation club that you get involved in. Again, it all helps do what we do all around the world for hunting and hunters. Thank you, Dave.
I appreciate you, man, and I'm looking forward to seeing that episode. Maybe I don't want to see. I saw it one time, but when's that going to come out? You say?
So we just released Jordan's. I got another one dropping in June. You may drop in July. May drop you in July.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate everything you do, man. And like I said, I follow you, and I learned so much from you. So thank you for being way smarter than I am. And next time around you, I'll buy you a caramel macchiato. Now that I know that you love those,
Light on the caramel drizzle, please. Okay.
Okay. Fair enough. No, take care, my friend. I appreciate you coming on. Let's do this again.
Sounds good.
All right, buddy. Well, folks, since you're listening to this podcast, you probably heard me talk about outdoorclass.com before. Outdoor Class is a great place to up your game if you're coming out west to go hunting, period. You're going to learn from the best people that there are, including Remy Warren, Randy Newberg, Corey Jacobson, and many, many more. If you want to get better at your craft, you have to learn. And if you want to learn, you got to go to the best spot. Outdoorclass.com is the spot to learn. The last week I had Randy Newberg on, and we talked about pronghorn hunting and how pronghorn hunting is one of the most economical hunts you can come out west to do. So guess what? He has a class on Outdoor Class that is about pronghorn hunting. You should go check it out. Use my code ALTITUDE at checkout for 20% off your subscription.